All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 8 p.m. programming hour of Life, the Universe, and Everything. Our panel this hour is All the Voices in Your Head, one plot from different points of view. Our panel this hour is with Charlie Pulsipher, Devri Walls, Emma Heggem, J. Ann Campanile, sorry, and VJ Gardner. And we have VJ Gardner. Nope, nope, sorry. Gone the wrong page here. So we have our moderator this evening as Emma. Sorry. VJ, you're tomorrow. You're saved. And then as a
Yes, I
reminder,
am.
as a reminder, we've got the online art show, and then we do also have the film festival that's going a little bit later this evening as well. Just check the announcements in Discord if you would like to join that. So, panelists, the floor is yours.
Okay, great, thank you. Just so everyone who's watching knows, we are going to try to get to questions at the end, so feel free to just post those on the chat as we go over stuff, and then we can get to those at the end for you. So to start off, let's have everyone just introduce themselves real quick and kind of tell you about their background so you know where they're coming from, talking about point of view. So I'm the moderator. I'm Emma Heggem. I'm the managing editor at Future House Publishing. Let's see, Charlie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Charlie Pulsipher. I write science fiction and fantasy, young adult, and I write a lot of point of view characters. I'm also a cardboard artist, a copywriter, ghostwriter, and everything in between.
Okay, great. Devri, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. So my name is Devri Walls. I am a young adult fantasy author. I have published, I really should know this answer. I have to count my head every time. I've published 8 novels to date. I've published almost every way you can at this point. I do a lot of panels. I do author coaching. I also teach voice lessons and try to juggle all of this with, children, because why not?
Okay, awesome. Jan?
Yeah, I'm J.N. Campanile. I write primarily romance with a side of horror/parody. My debut novel, Pride and Poor Judgment, just came out. It is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice from a gender-flipped Darcy's perspective. So I wanted to kind of shake things up and see how the story would look different from a different point of view. And it's pretty good, not to pat myself on the back.
All right, and last but not least, Valerie.
Hi, my pen name is VJ Gardner. My first name is Valerie. I have 3 novels out there, young adult, kind of fractured fairy tales, fantasy, and I've got a 4th so close to done, but life. My day job is apparently essential, and so I've wound up full-time. To complicate matters, I also, besides writing, I do formatting for a small press. Also, I make little stuffies, dragons, of course, I'm obsessed with, in case you haven't guessed.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So to get us started talking about point of view, I thought probably the best place to start would be when do you use multiple point of views in a book? Let's see, let's maybe go backwards. So Valerie, you want to go first?
Well, for me, that's kind of an interesting question because it depends on what is the most important point of view in that scene. And I actually have one particular scene that occurs at the end of Blood of Ancient Kings, the beginning of Dracona's Rebirth. And in each book, you see it from the opposite point of view, and it means something entirely different to each character, and you get the point of view that's important for that book in that book. So even though it's the exact same scene, and the same dialogue, it was really interesting to write it from those opposite points of view. And most books I have 2 or 3 primary characters that are point of view characters, and then a few secondary characters that jump in here and there. Occasionally I have tertiary characters that try to take over, and you have to be careful about that.
Okay, Jan?
Yeah, so whenever you're choosing a point of view, whether it's multiple or singular, your point of view character should be the person with the most to lose in the story. So when I was writing Pride and Poor Judgment, I wrote it in high school because I strongly related to Darcy and really, really wanted to see his side represented more. But I had to stop and think, well, the original and most retellings are from Elizabeth's perspective. Elizabeth really has the most to lose in the story. So what kind of depth do I need to add to Darcy's perspective to the story to raise the stakes? So when you're writing with multiple points of view, you want to make sure that your characters have personal stakes in the story.
Devri?
I write exclusively from multiple points of view. It's one of my favorite tools in my toolbox. And it's for the reason that it's Jan, right? Not just Dan. Okay, I feel like I'm going to butcher that.
You're good.
So
Okay.
it's for the same reason that she just mentioned, which is making sure that each scene is being told from whatever character's POV raises the stakes the most, increases the emotional attachment or the implications in that particular scene. And I love being able to manipulate that along with the plot and the words. Like, it's just, if you can figure out a way to do it well and very thoughtfully, it is a massive tool, in my opinion.
Awesome. And then Charlie?
I mostly write from multiple point of views as well. I'm toying with a couple stories right now that don't, and it's really bizarre and hard for me because I'm like, when's the other person going to jump in? My first series, I actually did about 13 point of view characters,
Wow.
which I do not recommend anybody does, because it is really hard to do well and to give the weight to all those characters. When I was outlining, I had to do this crazy outline where I wrote out every scene and then I highlighted each character in a different color so I could see if I was balancing them out. And it was very, very difficult. And I have, most of the time, people like the book, it gets good reviews. I do occasionally get people who are like, it's way too much going on. I can't get into it, which is a risky run doing multiple point of view characters. So you do it when it makes sense for your story. So for that story, it made sense. I wanted it to be complex and to show the depth and the variety in these two different worlds that I was bouncing back and forth between. In my second series, I did just 2 point of views because I just wanted to give equal weight to my male and female protagonists. I wanted them to be on equal footing the whole way through the book. And as a male author, we tend to make the mistake of just bullying through with our male protagonists and then not doing the females very well. And I wanted to balance that and do them both really well.
Great. So that brings up kind of my next question, which is when you have your multiple point of view characters, how do you balance them out? How do you restrain them so you end up with your main character and having a single plot line at some point at the end of the book? Does anyone have particularly strong thoughts and wants to go first? Or
I think the balance is the tricky part for sure. And that's why Charlie said he didn't recommend doing 13 because it is hard. And I work with more than I recommend as well. Like not 13. Nice. But the Venator series that I have going right now has got really probably 6 pretty consistent POVs that hop around. And this is my opinion. when you have an additional POV that's been added, it needs to be significant. I'm not saying they all have to be your main characters, but when you start to add a POV, it's going to pull that character up into kind of protagonist territory or antagonist territory, right? Because otherwise, why would we add them? So if you're going to add that in, I think you need to be cognizant of, is this something I want to balance within the story and that's still continuing to push that plot forward, as opposed to just these, distracted scenes that are cool, but don't move our story forward. So I'm always very meticulous, and I always sit back and think, do I have to have this POV added? Do I have to have it added here? One, but more importantly, am I ever going to pull it in again? Because if I'm never going to pull it in again, is there another POV that I could use to keep this on track for my readers? But yeah, it always has to be very thoughtful. Otherwise, the plot does get very lost in all the POVs.
For me, I generally have 2 main characters, and then I'll have some secondary characters. And usually if they come into a point of view, it's a paragraph or 2. It's not even an entire page usually. It's something to show what's going on around those central characters. And I did try the write from a single point of view. And I tried it twice, and it turns out those 2 characters belonged in the same book because they were kind of mirror of each other. They were opposites and yet the same. It's kind of an odd one. I can't wait until it makes sense to publish that one. But generally, if I find that there's a tertiary or a secondary character getting a lot more voice, I have to decide, do I need to rewrite these scenes? Sometimes I'll go through and change the text color for each point of view character and see who's doing all the talking, see who should be doing all the talking, and fix that. It usually only takes me a chapter or 2 to figure that one out, but this 4th book I've been working on, I basically had to gut the middle out of it because a tertiary character was trying to take over. He'll get his own book later.
Yeah, balancing can be hard, and it's hard to not sometimes obsess over it. My work in progress is told from 2 points of view, the leading couple, and for a long while, I wanted to tell it from both points of view, but it wasn't going to stack out quite evenly. He was going to get a little more screen time than she did, and so with that, I was like, well, I can't do an every other chapter structure. Maybe I should just cut her point of view and leave it all to him. But the story really needed to be told from both points of view because they're both fighting their own demons, and they both have their own struggles that kind of intertwine with each other that really enrich each other by having both points of view. So it's really important to make sure you're balancing, but make sure you're not getting into the weeds too much. If one character has 2 or 3 chapters before it's the next character's turn, that's okay. It's what the story needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Troy, I'm going to say one thing. I don't want to take over and not let you talk. What you said was, I liked the balance is important, but not important at the same time, because what we're going for, which is exactly what Emma asked, is pushing the plot forward. So what POV will push the plot forward? And that's the one you go with. It doesn't matter if he's had 3 already or if she's had 3 already. Sorry, I'm done. Charlie, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was going to say a lot of the same things, that like you do need balance, but you can't obsess about it. Even though I did obsess a little bit about it because I rewrote my outlines out. I wrote each scene as one little sentence so I could see it all visually in front of me, and then highlighted each one with a different character. But that was mainly so I could see an overview of the whole book and see if I had big chunks of like yellow here and then none for like 30 chapters. And so I needed to just make sure that it was balanced overall close. I didn't like count the words, like this guy had 10 words more than her, so I'm gonna have to write more for her. That's too much.
Yeah.
But I did obsess a little bit about a few things because I had 2 point of view characters that were linked in a way that I reveal at the end of the second book. So I'm not going to tell you, but I put them together every time I had them. So every time I had this character, it immediately was followed by the other character, and I did that on purpose because I wanted them linked throughout the book. So when they were linked in another way, you weren't as surprised. It felt more natural.
Sense.
Yeah. And so I do obsess a little bit about some things and then don't obsess about other things. So it works out.
Obsessed,
Okay.
but only a little.
So, without being too formulaic, then, how do you decide how often to use a point of view, or if a character, is missing, how long can they be missing for? Do you have any kind of rules of how big of a gap is too big a gap before you need to circle back to somebody?
I write very gut wise. I am not a highlighter of paragraphs person. So my only concern, so with Venators, for example, I've got 2 mains and then like 4 sub-mains. The sub-mains are slightly more entertaining at times. So I do have to check myself and be like, okay, I know we love them, but it has been a while since we've seen the actual main characters of this story, like inside their head. We see them, but not inside their head because I'm not in that POV at that time. So sometimes I will intentionally add those in only for that purpose. But other than that, for me, it's a pacing issue almost. It's a gut, it's a flow. And yeah, I have to feel it, and whatever feels right is what I go with.
I agree with that. And it's only when my alpha reader says, so-and-so's got too much going on and they're not a main character, that I start highlighting and trying to figure out where am I going astray, what can be rewritten, what moves the plot forward. But I do write more organically. I've got one book that I've tried to outline and it's a headache. I don't do it well when I outline, so that one's been a bit of a struggle, but I got to get it done eventually.
No one else?
It really depends on the book. Like I have one that I did every other chapter was like they just switched back and forth, and that worked out. It doesn't always work out that way. And in my first series, it did not work out that way. I had 2 plot lines on 2 separate worlds that I was flipping back and forth from. And so I would follow 3 characters here and then 3 characters here, and then I'd flip back and back and back and back. And then I waited until the second book to introduce a couple more characters because I knew they were important, but I didn't want to overwhelm people in the first book more than I already did. So so you just kind of have to take it bit by bit and see how it flows in the pacing and just take it one story at a time.
Yeah. Well, and I think something that is really important for new writers, or we did, yes, hopefully she will be back here in a second. I think one of the things to remember is that although there are things with POV, there are rules where eventually you will cross the line, and anyone who reads it will be like, this is not working. There are things that are a matter of taste. And just because one or the other of us does or doesn't do it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a no-go. Like, Charlie, I am sad that you said that before I said this comment, because he talked about doing the every other chapter thing. I don't love that personally. Like, I've read several books where, for me, I feel like I, as a reader, can't get all the way in and like fully connected when I'm ping-ponging back and forth. but I think I'm in the minority of that opinion. And a lot of people love that layout and don't have any problem with that layout. That's done marvelously. And some people really don't like having to wait, several or multiple chapters to get back to a character that they love. Like when George R. R. Martin just like didn't put Tyrion in book 4, by the way. I was a little upset about that. So that there are rules, but there are also a lot of personal preference things that fall under this umbrella.
Speaking of
I
gaps,
tend
the answer
to
with LTE is
divide
not very long. Sorry.
That's fine. We're glad you're back. With me, I will have multiple points of view in the same chapter, and I have a 5 asterisks divider between scene changes or points of view. And so that clues the reader in that there's going to be a change if it's in the middle of the chapter, and as opposed to at the beginning of a new chapter. And I think that just keeps the reader a little more sane, gives them the heads up without interrupting the flow of the book too much. That, they're not going, okay, now who's talking now? But they're knowing that somebody else is going to be talking. They can figure it out quickly, whose point of view they've changed into.
Jan, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I just agree with everything that's been said on this question.
Yeah,
I hope there was a 15-second blip where you could have said something controversial, and
it
I would
was
have
horrible,
no idea.
and
You're excited now. So Valerie brought up a good point. So she was talking about using scene breaks to indicate that a point of view is going to change, and we've also talked about doing like different chapters. So how do you handle when you're changing a point of view, either like structurally or just like in the text, to give cues to the readers to help them be oriented between the different points of view?
I primarily use chapter breaks and cheat by putting the characters who's going to be a point of view, their name on the top. But I try to write it in a way that the reader will know whether or not there's an indicator there. So favorite words, for example. So the leading guy in my work in progress has a very different set of favorite words than the leading lady, because the guy is a cook, the lady is an actress, and so they're going to have different ways of seeing the world. The guy says worth his salt a lot, and that's definitely not something that would ever cross my leading lady's mind, because it's just not how she thinks. And so you just want to give the reader cues with favorite words, with metaphors, with idioms. The speech patterns, my guy swears a lot more than the girl does. And so there are just little breadcrumbs you can leave to indicate to the reader that, hey, so-and-so is taking over now.
I feel like I should let Charlie go.
I have a couple of different languages. I have a couple of different languages, and in one language you have palace and infant and coffin. In the other language you have castle and baby and casket. There's certain clue words as to what language you're talking in, and different characters will translate and different characters will use primarily one or the other language, but it's for the reader, quote unquote, translated into English. But that's another way of kind of cluing the person in, the reader into that you've changed characters, is definitely how they talk and how they view the world. My husband's an engineer and in construction, and he's going to notice different things than, say, a banker or a lawyer's going to notice about a room or when they come in. So the character's occupation does color their language and their point of view.
Charlie, do you want to go and I'll take up and I'll go last?
Sure. So in my first series, I created a little image that I put between scene breaks. So every time somebody saw this little egg pop up, they knew that they were switching characters, so they could get used to it a little bit. I also did work very hard on making my characters have different forms of speech, different ways of talking. I had elf characters that didn't really like English, and so it was very clipped, and they didn't use contractions. And then I had dwarves that had kind of a sing-songy, slow drawl almost. And then my main characters talk like teenage kids, and I just kind of played with the different ways of speaking for each character. In my second series, I created an image that was specific to each character. So every time I switched the scene, it would show up at the top, and you knew, okay, the fire symbol, you're going to get Cindy from now on. Water symbol, you're going to get Nyx. And so people were a little more clued in who was speaking right away with those symbols.
Man, you're fancy. I know. I'm just lame old asterisk over here. Yeah, everything that everyone said, I used. The asterisks, the chapter breaks. I don't think it's cheating at all to put the first name or the name at the top of the chapter. In fact, when I don't do it, my editor's usually like, I just don't know who's talking here. I think she just does it to be obnoxious, because she totally does. But so yeah, I don't think that that's cheating. The cadence and the contractions. The only other thing I would add is that sometimes we forget that we have to apply all of these rules to the general prose. So when you're in full POV and you're trying to do this beautiful description of an area or whatever, it still has to be in the POV that you're in. And I've gotten caught on that a couple times. Like my editor's like, is this Tate talking? Why would Tate ever talk like this? And I'm like, you are correct. He would never describe a jail like that in a million years. Let me fix that. So yeah, make sure you apply it to the whole scene.
Great. You guys do multiple point of views in third person or first person or both? You guys think there's different struggles with any of those if you've had to deal with both?
I don't write first person at all. I might someday. But I haven't yet. So I don't feel like I can answer that question beautifully. Okay. I prefer the third because it gives me the omniscient, and I like power. I don't know.
I write all first person, so you do your half the answer, and I'll do my half the answer, and we'll make a whole answer.
Perfect. I love it. Oh, sorry, I was done with my half. You go, Dan. You got it.
So I like to write first person because it gets you, for the opposite reason that Devri likes third person, it gets you really just deep, intimately into the character's head. With first person switching point of views, it can get a little disorienting just because you don't have those little cues right away when we switch characters. But I enjoy it a lot in my work in progress. Whenever my leading guy is talking or taking the point of view, I get to see different things, like Valerie was mentioning earlier. Dean's going to notice the kitchen first. In anywhere he goes, he's going to notice what the cookware is, what the triangle is, and he's going to see the practicality. Emily's going to see the cameras first.
Yeah, exactly. My husband walks into a room and he will instantly tell you how many ceiling tiles are either askew or stained from a roof leak. Also, if you're writing characters of different ages and different heights, if you're writing someone who's short, sit on the floor. Get that different point of view, because let me tell you, you see a lot of different things from that lower point of view. You'll see if there's gum on the bottom of the table. You're writing someone tall, stand on a stool, look around the room. How does that change your point of view and what things pop out? And, A woodworker might identify what kind of wood is used in the room, but a banker might just, oh, this elegant bookshelf for all my records or something, or this is a great desk, it's got so many drawers. They're going to notice different things according to whatever their occupation and interests are. And yeah, an actress is going to notice the cameras, the cook's going to notice the kitchen, a pregnant woman's going to be looking for that bathroom. It's what have they seen? What's new? I had characters that rode in an elevator for the first time. How do you describe an elevator from the point of view of someone who doesn't know what an elevator is? The doors close, their stomach feels funny, there's some vibration, the doors open, and the hall's a different color. You gotta get into your character's head, even if you write third person. What's important for the story and what works better for the story, I think, is the primary answer to that. Is
Okay.
Get into your character's head, and then what works best to move the story.
Okay, Charlie, did you have thoughts on first person or third person?
I write both. I'm one of the ones that writes both, and so I find third person easier for me. It just feels very natural to be telling a story in third person, and it's easier for me to describe things and helps the reader very quickly because you can use their name pretty right away and be like, Dveldor did this, and then you're like, okay, we're in his head now. Where with the first person, you have to sink into them, and I created some things to help with that. Like my characters in my first person book have synaesthesia, so they experience colors as other senses. And so each one of them has a different form of it. So one of them like smells and tastes colors, and the other one hears music and noise and things, and then another one feels textures. And so I clue the reader in pretty quickly with one of them like feeling texture or talking about their specific synesthesia, and so that helped. But first person, it is a little harder to get the reader clued in right away who's talking.
Yeah, when Jan was talking about how she has the name at the beginning of the chapter, I was like, oh, I wonder if she writes in first person, because that's so much more common in first person, just because you don't get to use their name in the first paragraph the way you do in third person. And so if you can put it at the beginning of the chapter like that, then the name's still on the page, and the readers get to actually read the name of the point of view character.
Yes, I did
but
that
in third
too.
person, it's in the middle. Yeah, so that can be a useful tool if you're gonna balance multiple points of view in first person. Okay, I think we've pretty much covered all the different questions about keeping things balanced and knowing who's the right character for which scenes, and just making them all sound distinctive in different voices. So if people have been posting questions, we can definitely start doing some Q&A, or we can go into maybe like what's personally been challenging for each of you about point of views if nobody has any questions.
I think I saw a couple in the chat, but I wasn't paying 100% attention.
Okay.
All right, hello again. So for our first question, we have from Amelia Rose. Is it bad to have an omnipotent narrator voice that then bounces between lots of different characters to reveal different information, even if those characters aren't followed through the entire book?
I haven't read a book with a narrator voice in a long time. That's kind of a more old-fashioned.
I've actually
as
just
far
read
as I
a
know.
couple recently that have done the narrator third person and done it really, really well. I think when you do the narrator, it isn't necessary to jump as many points of view because it is the omniscient. When you're in the deeper POV, like you can only reveal what that character can see, just exactly like first person does. But when you have a narrator style, it can just go wherever you want. So you don't even have to jump. I just finished the Left-Handed Booksellers of London, and that's a narrator style because it caught me off guard because they switched thoughts. Like in the same chapter, he was bouncing back and forth, and it took me a second to readjust and be like, oh, this is omniscient. So I think there's a way to do that simply and beautifully that doesn't require the ping-ponging thing that I think you're referring to, but I may have misunderstood the question.
Yeah, and this question is almost as much about POV as it is about how much should the reader know. So when you're revealing information through multiple points of view or through an omniscient narrator, you want to ask yourself, how much does the reader know? Why do they need to know that? And is it the end of the world if I stab them in the back with it later instead?
And what do they need to know that right this second? Because authors get confused with that. They're like, well, they need to know. Well, yeah, they do, but not right now. They can know in 2 chapters and that would be better.
Yeah. It's a fine line though, because you don't also want to cheat the reader where they're like, oh, you just hid that for 3 chapters, where it's obvious he knew this back then and he didn't share it. So you have to kind of weigh that in as well and be like, if the omniscient character knows all and chooses to save things for later, then the reader can get annoyed at the omniscient narrator that way.
Yeah. A really good omniscient narrator book is The Book Thief. It's about as omniscient as you get. And the narrator knows the ending of the book, and he actually tells you the ending of the book. And then by the time you get there, you've forgotten that he told you this sucky thing happened. It's a really good book.
I think I was on a panel a few years ago and we kind of talked about The Book Thief and the different narrator types. And one thing that they talked about was with that omniscient narrator, still making sure that the narrator is making decisions about what to tell people, because the narrator is now a character too and a point of view that you have to consider. So if the narrator has a reason to not tell the reader something, then that can be whether the narrator is an actual character like death, or just a perspective and kind of opinions. That can be a way to decide which information they're going to reveal at which points, without just having to reveal everything or keep secrets for no apparent reason. So that's another tip there.
All right, and then next we have from Genevieve Ann. How do you decide which characters to use for POVs? If I have multiple main characters, but they won't all have chapters from their perspective, how might I decide which characters should have perspective chapters?
For me, it's all about the balance. So I had 2 main characters who were like, they are beautiful and wonderful, but together there's not a fabulous dynamic to bounce dialogue off of. It was hard to balance it. It was very slow moving. And so I will pull the POVs based on, the emotional impact they can add to the story by seeing that through their eyes, but also what characters do I need in order to create a very well-rounded, balanced feel to the story and the dialogue. And every single book that I have written, everyone's favorite character never started the story with me. I have had to pull them in and invent them mid-story because things are just not working. And I will pull that in and it will round out the cast, and then it works great.
Well, you don't have to devote an entire chapter to a character, and you don't have to split the chapters either. It should be driven by what works best for the plot and what's necessary for the story. And so if you're doing the first person, entire chapters in one point of view, that's fine. And all your chapters don't have to be the same length, I guess is another way of putting it. But for me, sometimes I'll bounce back and forth during a chapter, just depending on what does the reader need to know and which character has to convey that. And if it's not quite working, sometimes you can turn it around and write it from the opposite point of view, and it comes out better, and sometimes it doesn't. That's what editing's for.
Yeah, there's this concept with choosing point of views and how many. There's this concept in conflict management called the third story. And as the author, it's your job to know the third story. The third story is the omniscient view of this is everything that happened. And this is different from an objective view where these are the facts. This is what everyone was feeling, the additive things that led this conflict to happen. And you as the author know exactly what happened. It's your job to reverse engineer that and say, what is so-and-so's story on this? What is this character's story on this? And how are they going to add, who's going to tell the best story? And what are they going to add to the book as a whole to bring their perspective in as opposed to someone else's?
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with the plot of your book as well. I like my characters to do things separate from one another, and so sometimes I need them to tell their own story. I have characters who arrive on another world and immediately lose each other, and so I have to follow both of them as they're trying to find their way back to each other. Or I have a character who gets abducted by trolls halfway through the book, and I want to show what's happening to her, and so I need them both to tell their stories. And so it really depends on your plot and your structure, and if you need that alternative perspective as well. Like, I could tell the story without them, but it wouldn't be the full story. It wouldn't have everything that really happens that is important to the plot in the story without me splitting the point of views.
My editor's rule, which I break every time, and she yells and then tells me, okay, never mind. But so you know what her rule is, is I think it's no adding of a new POV after the first, I want to say 100 pages, which I have yet to not break that rule. But that's what she tries to follow for those of you who write normal amounts of POVs.
Don't do what Veronica Roth did.
Oh! It's not okay.
No, not at all. You literally added a point of view just to be a bastard.
Yes, and oh, I can't even talk about it. It makes me so mad.
Now,
Speaking as another editor. Sorry. Speaking as another editor, rather than we keep starting and stopping at the same time. Sorry. Rather than worrying about like a single new point of view, I always guide it based on like when the first new point of view exists. So like, you know, if 100 pages in you're introducing your sixth new point of view, that's probably a less big deal than if, you know, 200 pages in you're introducing your first new point of view. That's going to be way more jarring for your readers.
It's true. It's very, very different. Very different thing. Yeah.
And what is the time span of your book? I have one book that covers 3 generations. And so, of course, there's going to be another point of view added in the middle of the book. But then I have another book that takes less than a year, but then the characters live for over 1,000 years. So some of adding point of view characters depends on who's being born, who's dying, who's important to the story, and you know what time range do you cover in your book?
Okay, we probably have time for maybe one more question and then wrap up thoughts. Any other pending questions we need to answer from the chat? I don't.
Yes, so for the last one here, from M. First, is it a good idea to briefly go to a secondary or tertiary character's POV in order to see how a main character is from the outside? Because that could be pretty different from how the main character sees themselves. Related to that, is it okay to have this perspective when the main character is going through something really emotionally tough, so long as you get the main character's POV and internal experience as well?
Proceed with caution.
I've actually done that.
This is the face of. Am I going to piss somebody off when I say what I'm about to say? Probably. Okay, it's probably not necessary. So I think it's less a matter of is it okay or not, and is it necessary? You should be able to write a story in a manner that gets that across without having to jump to a character that is a secondary character in order to accomplish that writing goal. I know that sounds a little harsh, but write it, rewrite it, write it again. And the other thing to look at is if you can't get it across in that scene, it's likely that the problem actually is existing earlier in the story. And that we need to look there to figure out what hasn't been said or done. And if I am completely off base on both of those, then we maybe need to look at whether that character should have been a part of the story the whole time instead of just popping in once. Okay, I'm done.
With mine, the point of view was a secondary character that is within the story for a bulk of it. And it's actually two characters talking that are secondary characters, and it's all of about 3 paragraphs. So it's very, very short, but it shows and foreshadows what is inevitable. And it just kind of gives the reader a head up. So it's not taking over. And it was as brief as it needed to be. So again, proceed with caution. Yeah.
Anything to add, Jan or Charlie?
Pretty much the same. Like, you can do it. I've seen it done. Even J.K. Rowling does a point of view break where she uses another character randomly, and most people don't notice. Most people just read through it and they're like, okay, that was cool. So if you can sneak it in without people really noticing, then maybe. But most of the time, if you want to show something that's happening to the character, you should show it from them or your secondary point of view character, not from a third character. There was one break that I did where I used a character to show how bad things had gotten in the world, where I used this one character for just this one scene where they die at the end. And I just wanted to show how bad it was because the characters were outside that. And so sometimes, but usually no.
Pretty much same situation. Yeah.
Okay, great. It sounds like we are out of time. I don't know if anyone has time to go answer maybe any additional questions over in the attendee chat room afterwards. You can let everyone know real quick if you'll be available there. And then other than that, I think we are out of time. It's